We're going to get started. All right, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in to yet another episode of Milk Minutes, brought to you by Healthy Start Center for Urban Breastfeeding. Per usual, I'm Bianca Suggs. I will be your host tonight. I am the Director of Maternal and Child Health for Healthy Start, overseeing both the CUB as well as our doula program. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the CUB, we are a lactation support program offering both breastfeeding educational classes as well as 24/7. So that's 7 days a week, any time of the day, access to certified lactation consultants, all exclusively servicing Black mothers residing in Allegheny County. Now, if you need any lactation support, please do not hesitate to reach out to us using our latch line, in which you are able to contact one of our CLCs. And also, if you need some more support, don't hesitate, to enroll in our program using the link within the chat. Now, to celebrate Breastfeeding Awareness Month, we are bringing Milk Minutes to you each and every week here on Facebook Live, Tuesdays at 6 p.m. And I'm really excited for this particular episode because we have both Sophia Elliott as well as Maggie Neely from the Women's Law Project. Thank you so much for joining us today, you guys. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at the Women's Law Project.
Sophia, you can go ahead.
Hi, well, thank you so much for having us, Bianca. We are thrilled to be here. As you mentioned, I'm Sophia Elliott. I'm a staff attorney with the Women's Law Project based in our Philadelphia office. And I have been with the Women's Law Project for about 2 years now. And I help pregnant and lactating workers and students advocate for themselves in their educational settings and in the workplace. And I also counsel people on their right to public accommodation for lactation needs as well.
And thank you so much for having us, Bianca. I'm Maggie. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a legal fellow and attorney in the Western Pennsylvania office of the Women's Law Project. And I've been here for about a year, and I do a similar work to Sophia, so supporting a lot of WLP's workplace justice efforts, particularly with respect to helping pregnant workers stay in their jobs while maintaining healthy pregnancies and supporting WLP's reproductive justice efforts as well.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Now, for those of us who are unaware of what the Women's Law Project is, Maggie, can you explain that to us?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Women's Law Project was founded in 1974, and we are a nonprofit public interest legal organization that works to defend and advance the rights of women, girls, and LGBTQ+ people in Pennsylvania and beyond. And one way that we do that is through our Legal Navigator program, which was recently officially launched in our Western Pennsylvania office and expanded in our Philadelphia office. And this is really an early intervention program through which we provide legal advice and assistance to pregnant and lactating workers and students to help them stay in their jobs and stay in their educational programs while maintaining a healthy pregnancy and caring for their pregnancy-related needs, including pumping or breastfeeding at work or school.
That's awesome. Thank you guys both for the work that you do. So what are some workplace rights women have in Pennsylvania? Sophia, if you could speak to that in regards to pregnancy, of course.
Yeah, of course. So I'm a lawyer. So, first I have to give you a caveat, which is that it depends, right? So it's going to depend often on the individual, the size of their employer, where their employer is located. So is their employer based in Philadelphia, for example, or Pittsburgh, which has more protections, unfortunately, than some of the rest of the state? And then it's also going to depend on things like how long have they worked there, and how their employer is treating other employees, or what policies and practices they have in place. So if people have questions about how laws might particularly apply to them and their situation, they should definitely reach out to us. Thank you for putting our phone numbers in the chat. I encourage people to reach out even if they don't have a legal problem. It's always good to plan in advance. If you're wondering what your lactation rights are and you're still just planning your pregnancy, that's a good time to get in touch with us. We like early planning. So with that said, people have lots of rights, so which people might not necessarily know. So one thing that I would like to point out is that there is a law, the FMLA, the Family and Medical Leave Act, which applies to employers that have 50 or more employees. And there are a couple other criteria you have to meet as well. You basically have to have been working with your employer for more than a year, but this guarantees an employee up to 12 weeks of leave to bond with their baby when they deliver. And it can also be used for other things, other serious medical conditions. And it's job protected. So that means that the employer can't fire you for taking your leave. And it's unpaid, but some employers may have stronger protections and may afford paid leave. So you should inquire with your employer if they have a short-term disability policy that might apply to you while you're out on leave, or some other way that you can ensure to maintain your income while you're out bonding with your baby on maternity leave. So that's at the federal level. And then both state and federal law require employers to provide pregnant employees with the same accommodations that they give non-pregnant employees. So that means that if there is an employer, and this law federally applies to, it's Title VII, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act. So it applies to employers with 15 or more employees. And then at the state level, we're more protective. So employers with 4 or more employees will be covered. But basically what it says is that if my employer is treating someone who's not pregnant with a certain accommodation, and they're supplying it, they have to treat me the same way. So if you know of a coworker who was given elevator access because, for example, they were in an accident and they broke their leg, you have to be afforded the same kind of accommodation during your pregnancy, as long as you're similar in your ability or inability to work. So that's going to require knowing, right, how your employer is treating other people, which we don't always know, but there might be a policy in place. So it's always good to ask if your employer has an accommodation policy and see how you might fit into it. And there's another federal law called the Americans with Disabilities Act, also applies to employers with 15 or more employees, and there's a comparable state law as well that's a little bit more protective, and that's going to protect any employee who has a pregnancy-related disability. So things like preeclampsia or gestational diabetes, if you need an accommodation, not just for the pregnancy alone, which is not considered a disability, but for something related that's maybe complicating your pregnancy. It's going to require you to get off your feet if you have a physically demanding job, or you need more frequent snack breaks, for example. Your employer has to provide that to you for the pregnancy-related disability piece. And then so you'll notice what I didn't say is that pregnant people are afforded, without a disability or without looking at other employees, the right to pregnancy accommodations, full stop. And that's something that we are advocating for at the Women's Law Project. So there is a Pennsylvania law called, or a bill rather, the Pennsylvania Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. There is a similar bill pending at the federal level. And the goal there is to ensure that pregnant people can get reasonable accommodations that they need to stay tied to their employment while they're pregnant. So Philadelphia has a law that does provide for accommodations for pregnant people, regardless of how the employer is treating other employees. But that's something that we're fighting for, and that we encourage everyone to fight for as well, to make sure that we can protect folks across the state of Pennsylvania. And the last thing I'll say is that most people do know about this one. Title VII protects, of course, all pregnant people from harassment or retaliation on the basis of their sex or pregnancy.
Thank you. Now, you did say that Philadelphia has a little bit more protection than us over here in Pittsburgh, you would say.
Yeah, so Philadelphia has an ordinance that requires employers, unless there's an undue hardship to the employer, to provide a reasonable accommodation for pregnancy-related needs. And unfortunately, that is just not what we have in the rest of the state at this point. So if you have a pregnancy-related disability, you could be covered for a reasonable accommodation through federal law. And then, of course, we want to make sure that employees are being treated the same as their colleagues who are similar in their ability or inability to work. So those are the kinds of things we look for outside of Philly to get folks the accommodations that they need while pregnant. But unfortunately, no, we're still advocating for more comprehensive accommodation rights.
Okay. And then you also mentioned that it could be possible that employees are offered short-term disability in order to accommodate their leave. Can you speak a little bit more to that, what that looks like?
Sure. So many employers, but not all, might have a short-term disability policy, either through an insurance policy that they keep that employees are paying into, or alternatively, they may just provide it. Some large employers may have a short-term disability policy, in-house that's provided. So it's good to get ahead of the game on what your rights are and what benefits you may be entitled to. Some unionized workers may be able to get in touch with their union representatives to help advocate for accommodations and find out, whether they can get help that way. But yes, there are many employers do have short and long-term disability policies, and sometimes maternity leave and pregnancy accommodations may fall under that short-term disability policy, especially if there's something like a pregnancy-related disability that requires a period of short-term leave.
And you said the average length of leave that we see in the workplace is 12 weeks.
So that's what the Family and Medical Leave Act, the FMLA, requires employers to provide, large employers, so with 50 or more employees, up to 12 weeks of job protected leave. So if you use 2 weeks before you deliver, you would have 10 left after you deliver. And then, those weeks kind of start over again after 365 days go by. And we, like I said, we're happy to talk to anyone who has questions about leave balances or whether or not the FMLA is going to cover them and protect them. The other thing I'll say is that if you are not covered by the FMLA, you are still entitled to a reasonable amount of time to recover from childbirth, which is usually at least 1 to 2 weeks. So no employer should be asking somebody to come back to work the day after they deliver.
Thank you, Sophia. Maggie, what are some lactation rights that women have within PA that they may not be aware of?
Sure. So the Fair Labor Standards Act is a federal law that applies to some, but not all employees. And it gives covered employees the right to a clean, private space that is not a bathroom to use to express breast milk for a reasonable amount of time. And we should note here that this right doesn't include a right to safe milk storage. So employees should ask to bring a cooler or to store milk in the fridge if needed. Then the Philadelphia Fair Practices Ordinance, which Sophia was just talking about, gives nursing workers an affirmative right to reasonable accommodations related to their lactation needs. Again, so long as the accommodation does not impose an undue hardship on the employer. And the Pittsburgh City Code has been interpreted to require employers to provide reasonable accommodations for lactating workers. Again, so long as these accommodations don't impose an undue hardship on the employer. But unlike in Philadelphia, this right isn't explicitly contained in the text of the ordinance. So there's a little more uncertainty about what exactly this right entails and how protective it is. And finally, federal law, specifically the Americans with Disabilities Act, provides a right to reasonable accommodations for lactation-related disabilities, such as mastitis.
Now, how would an employer become aware of these rights if they aren't already?
So generally that would start with the employee notifying their employer that they need an accommodation, and making the employer aware that they do in fact have a right to that accommodation if the employer is for some reason resistant to providing the accommodation that they are requesting. Sophia, if you have anything you want to add to that, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I think step one is having that conversation, that dialogue with your employer, your supervisor, to figure out whether you can find an accommodation that works both for you and the employer, because that's the goal, is for it to work for everyone, so that it's in place and it doesn't get disrupted for whatever reason. And the other thing I would add is that if needed, you could ask your doctor, either your pediatrician if it's a lactation accommodation, or your OB-GYN, to write a note for you to help support your lactation accommodation request, especially in the context of a pregnancy-related disability, can be helpful in just not only explaining to the employer the law, but also why the accommodation is actually necessary, because sometimes employers might not be aware.
What would we consider a reasonable accommodation to pump?
So I think having a clean private space is reasonable, and particularly a space that's not a bathroom, as is the right that's afforded by the Fair Labor Standards Act and has been proposed at the federal level, called the PUMP Act. Some employers might be resistant to this because they might say, we don't actually have any, empty offices that this worker could use. But with some creativity, it is possible to give employees a private space. So you can get temporary shields or barriers that you could put up to create a private space to use, if there's not actually an empty office space that they could use. And also just thinking about things like coordinating people's schedules so that even if there's not a completely vacant space, working out times that an employee could use a space when someone else isn't in it.
Yeah, I want to second that, Maggie. It is important to be creative and flexible, especially on the employer's side, that they do need to provide these lactation rights, and the onus is on them to figure out how to make that work by, by finding space and time to let the employee express milk. And in addition to, a private space, I always encourage employer to try to find a space that has an electrical outlet for a pump, water to clean a pump, and then a table and a chair. It can be a busy office space, and to the extent that we can create a private space and get the employee everything that they need, then that's best. I will say that sometimes people ask me, what is a reasonable amount of time? I think that's going to depend on the individual, right? Some people need 20 minutes to express milk. Some may need 30, more or less. And there's a reason that these laws don't say employees are entitled to 20 minutes to pump. It's because everyone's body is different. Everyone needs a different amount of time. And employers should respect that and do what they can to help accommodate an employee, keeping in mind that if the employee is being asked to walk 5 minutes in one direction to a lactation space, and then they're being asked to walk 5 minutes back to their desk, we've lost 10 minutes there. So just employers should keep that in mind, and employees may need to flag that and break down the amount of time that they're going to need to make sure that the accommodation is mutually agreed upon and works for everybody involved.
Great information. A lot of which I was not aware of. So we've talked about what rights women can expect within the workplace in regards to their pregnancy as well as lactation. If any of our audience feels as though their rights have been somewhat violated, where can you guys step in and assist these women on how to advocate for themselves? What does that process look like? What can your services provide?
Sure. So Maggie did a great job in the beginning of flagging that we are early intervention, which means that we're happy to help at any stage. So if you think you've been discriminated against, definitely get in touch with us. If you just have questions or you're not totally sure, get in touch with us. And we can provide limited advice for free, give you an evaluation of what your rights might be tailored to your individual situation, and then help you try to take advantage of any benefits or accommodations that you may be entitled to. If there is discrimination and somebody wants to pursue that, they can take advantage of enforcement agencies at the federal, state, and local level to file a free complaint and enforce their pregnancy and lactation rights in the workplace. Please get in touch with us if you have questions. We'll be more than happy to set up a time to talk. If we can't answer your question or solve your particular problem, we'll do our best to put you in touch with another organization or service that can.
Awesome. Now, is this free of cost? Awesome. And what are you guys' hours? When are people able to contact you?
So our email intake, which I apologize, I don't think is on is in the chat, but it is on our flyer. So hopefully we can distribute the flyer. The email address is always open, and we'll get back to you during regular Monday to Friday business hours. Our phone lines, I think, are operating during normal business hours. Is that right, Maggie?
Yeah, that's right. In the Pittsburgh office, we have someone answering the phone 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And if someone calls outside those hours and leaves a message, we will get back to them as soon as we can.
Well, thank you guys so much. This was very, very vital information. I'm glad that we were able to get this out there. I appreciate the work that the Women's Law Project is doing. It's very much needed. Any other services that you guys want to plug?
Well, we know that many workers are also students. So if anyone has questions about their educational rights, please get in touch with us as well, because students and workers alike have rights. So there's a little plug for students too.
Thank you. And I'm going to plug the Cub again. If you are looking for lactation support and you are residing in Allegheny County and you're a Black mother and you need some lactation support on your breastfeeding journey, please do not hesitate to reach out to our latch line, which you can find in the chat. You can also find the 2 offices both in Philly, correct, as well as Western Pennsylvania for the Women's Law Project. Their phone numbers are in the chat as well. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Sophia. Thank you, Maggie. And we will see you all here again next week for Milk Minutes.
Thank you, Bianca.